Well, this is a terrific place to talk about democracy, and obviously Poland is a great place to celebrate democracy, and especially this year of all years. I can't remember a year as exciting as 2011 since 1989, and I was here in 1989, and I had the same feeling being in Tahrir Square a few weeks ago, the same kind of energy. And obviously the story in the Arab world is not finished. You turn the TV on right now and the news from Syria and Libya and Yemen is not encouraging. But we also should not remember that the story in the East is not finished either. The majority of the people who lived in the Soviet camp, in the Soviet Union and all the communist states, the majority of those people today live in countries that are designated not free or only partly free by Freedom House. There are a lot of places that are reminders that even though you've deposed the bad guys, you haven't actually put in place a proper democracy. That 1989 was just a start. In the same ways, we're just starting in the Arab world. And we're continuing, and we've made some great progress, but a lot of mistakes. Obviously, in the US, we've been doing some self-reflection about our support for some of these authoritarian systems in the Arab world for way too long, including until coming in far too late in Egypt and elsewhere. I think the Europeans, and I think this is actually one of the great benefits of having Poland take over the EU presidency, is doing some self-reflection of our failures as Europeans in trying to reach out to these countries and offering them incentives and opening the door. I just came back from Turkey last night, and it's a very exciting place. A lot is happening, but there's really one actor who is significantly missing, and it's Europe. And Europe would have been so important, especially now where there are fresh concerns about creeping authoritarianism. If Europe had been there to provide that sort of map and those kinds of incentives that it had only 6 years ago. So I think I want to start actually on this note with Radek Sikorski. And what more specifically can and should we do? And what are you planning to do in your 6-month turn at the presidency to really push this agenda forward?
First of all, let me say that when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton came to Krakow to relaunch with us the Community of Democracies, not everybody, either in Washington or in Europe, was convinced that this was the most important thing. And now I think people see that we were anticipating events. And in fact, Poland and the United States have an important democracy dialogue that President Obama is even talking about in his interview in one of the Polish magazines this week. Poland sees itself as a country that is good at exporting democracy. We don't have a colonial past, and we have a recent experience of doing it reasonably well. People can learn from our mostly successes, also some failures. We have the people who did it, also on this panel, and we are ourselves an example to follow. My theory is that some of these countries will not follow the United States or Britain, because these are countries whose democratic revolutions happened a long time ago, and they are much richer and much more powerful and somewhat intimidating. We are an example to follow that doesn't challenge anybody's sense of dignity, of pride. And now you might say that this was a no-brainer. The combination of demography, closeness to Europe, i.e. an example to follow, and aspirations that were awakened, and modern, I don't know about Twitter. I think Al Jazeera is actually more influential because it created an Arab voice for breaking the news monopoly in some of these countries. I think Twitter and Facebook were technically useful on the day. And now what can be done? I think first thing to remember is that each of these countries is really different. I like to think that we should make examples, that in the Eastern Partnership, Moldova is a country of a size that we can manage, that for which we can create incentives at a price that we can afford, that will actually change the behavior and the perception among the people of what's desirable. And a similar country that is, in my view, has the greatest chances of success in the south is Tunisia. But then, so there are those two countries, but there are also the two countries that are trendsetters and are swing countries. And in the east, that's Ukraine, and in the south, it's Egypt. And it's the orientation and the choices made by those countries that will be decisive.
In your new neighborhood policy?
Well, democracy promotion is cheap. Poland will propose during its presidency the creation of a European endowment of democracy. The US endowment, I understand, gets about 100 million per annum from Congress. If we endow the European fund with, say, 100 million euros, that's a tiny proportion of what we spend on development worldwide. And we could do a lot of work so that next time we are not surprised like we were this time, so that we help to sustain democratic elites even while inevitably we do business with undemocratic governments. And I believe that, let me just finish with this thought, that if you break down the transition process into its constituent parts, constitutional arrangements, party system, what to do about the ruling party, the security service, the justice system of the past, what role for exiles, what role and how do you regulate the media, and so on, what role for religion. Actually, their transition is very similar to our transition. And therefore, the experience of Central Europe is a unique database of solutions. 20 years ago, different countries took different routes. Today, we have results. And Arab democrats can draw these lessons from our successes and our failures so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's why we've started a collaboration with Al Jazeera to transmit that technology to them.
And what is the only thing in the European toolbox seems to be the offer of membership in the European Union. How can you, which obviously does not apply in North Africa and in the Middle East, and does not seem to apply to most of the countries that are directly to the east of Poland. How can Europe actually make a difference without having that, ace card available?
No, that's too crude. That's not the only thing we have to offer. We are the largest economy on earth. People aspire, we are a lifestyle superpower, okay? Okay. People in our neighborhood aspire to live like us. And and they also aspire to access to our market and to our institutions, universities and others. In other words, trade concessions, mobility partnerships, and help in creating the kind of rule of law, the kind of institutions that are compatible with us is an attractive package. It's happening in Eastern Partnership. We should do the same for the South.
Thank you. I want to turn now to the other side of the Atlantic, and obviously ask the question that most Poles want to ask is when they're going to get visas, but no, sorry, that's not a...
Let's not torture the ambassador.
Exactly. I'm sure he gets it every day. Ambassador Feinstein is obviously the U.S. ambassador in Warsaw. And Minister Sikorski mentioned this a little bit about the sort of the burden sharing that's been worked out between Secretary Clinton and the Europeans. And I wonder sort of what can America do with Europe? What does America want Europe to do on its own? And how do you do this together? And obviously relating to more of the Arab world than the East, I guess. But feel free to go in the East as well.
Well, I would use the space, if I can put it, between Belarus and Benghazi, because both of them, both the Eastern neighborhood and North Africa and the Middle East are on our agenda. And they were on our agenda when my president met with the Polish government leadership as well, and in a very substantive, real way. Not in a way to make anybody feel good or to flatter anybody, although it's always good to do those things. But as the minister said, this democracy dialogue that we've established between our two countries is very tangible. It's the only such dialogue we have with any other country, and what we have discovered is that whether it's in the Eastern neighborhood or more broadly, there's a lot we can do together. We saw that in 2000 when we established the Community of Democracies in Warsaw with Professor Goremek and Secretary Albright. And we saw it again, as the minister said, when the minister and Secretary Clinton met, and actually at that point, it was in July, talked about the importance of civil society in building democracy, and that was very prescient. And now we find that the role of the transatlantic community in supporting democracy is really essential. And you know, I had the privilege of spending some time with the Prime Minister this morning and his team, and we were meeting with President Dudkiewicz just informally, and I said afterwards to the President, did this take you back 20 years ago? And there was this just terrific feeling of people like the Prime Minister and his team working earnestly and pragmatically and idealistically to change a country. And two things came out of that which were very much related, Matt, to your question. You know, one was the importance of the United States and Europe, and two was the importance of the United States and Poland. So transatlantic solidarity is extremely important, and the United States and Poland, I think, have a unique role to play. Poland, because of its example, and what President Obama said, very similar to your words, Mr. Minister, the immediacy of the example in Poland gives Poland tremendous credibility when it goes to different parts of the world and explains how to do it. And Mr. Minister, when you went to Benghazi and said, if we could do it, so could you, it had real meaning to them and was inspiring to them. And it's no accident that many other ministers followed in your footsteps from the transatlantic community. I think another good example of the kind of cooperation we'd like to see, and we'd like to see more of, frankly, is how we cooperated on Belarus. Unfortunately, the outcome is you know, far from certain, and the cause of our cooperation most recently is unfortunately the brutal crackdown following the December 19th elections. But I think maybe an untold story of how we managed to forge a strong transatlantic position was Polish leadership to push for sanctions, American agreement and support for such a position, and then very, very close coordination between our governments and within the transatlantic space so that we could announce together very strong sanctions so that it was clear that the transatlantic community was speaking with one voice. There were no cracks. This is extremely important to send a clear message of opposition. And then, at least as important, we sent a clear message to democracy activists in Belarus that we were paying attention, not only by punishing Lukashenko and those around him, but also by providing tangible support to to those in Belarus trying to build a better life for themselves and their people.
But that was more of an ad hoc move, wasn't it? That was. Shouldn't there be more a forum for the U.S. and Europe talk through this together? And why shouldn't that forum be NATO?
Right. So you were anticipating what I was going to say, but first of all, it wasn't ad hoc in the sense that we were responding to events. That is true, but we did very carefully coordinate. I mean, the EU went first in its announcement, but you saw that the United States went immediately after, and that wasn't a coincidence. We wanted Europe to go first. Europe knew what we were going to do, and we saw where Europe was going as well. And I think working together, Poland from the eastern edge of the European Union, the United States from the western edge of the Transatlantic space, we were able to forge transatlantic solidarity together. What I would like to see is exactly right. I would like to see more of this and regularized as well. The United States puts in a lot of money in the Eastern Partnership countries. Money isn't everything, but it's something. Over $300 million in the Eastern Partnership countries, not including the compact Moldova and the United States recently agreed, not including the assistance to Georgia. So there's a lot that we're doing, and the Eastern Partnership Initiative has identified a very significant sum of money. We need first to do some diagnostic work, forensic work. What is it each of us is doing? How can we do it better together? And we need to get to a position where we're coordinating. And it's not particularly important to me whether we do it as friends of the Eastern Partnership or whatever the technical arrangements are, but there needs to be something formal set up, and I'm hopeful that perhaps the Eastern Partnership Summit that will take place in Warsaw this fall will be a good occasion for us to look together at how we can do this in a more regularized way.
From the east, I wanted to turn south for the moment to Ana Gomes, who's a member of the European Parliament from Portugal, and you're obviously much closer, on virtually the border with countries that are going through these tumultuous changes. And obviously they affect your part of Europe with refugees coming over from Tunisia. And I guess the main question that I was curious about is, with those countries, the Southern Rim and Europe itself going through so many problems, economic problems these days, how do you find the time and the political will to think about what Europe should be doing vis-a-vis North Africa and the Arab world?
Well, you said that I'm from Portugal, and so 37 years ago we had a democratic revolution, tremendously supported by the Carnation Revolution. Indeed, a coup d'etat, but with tremendous popular support. And that was because we really wanted to move from dictatorship into democracy. And that was what led us to demand our accession to the EU. It was mostly the political aim to anchor firmly our democracy and not go back into dictatorship, more than, of course, the economic prospects. 37 years, and we just had elections last Sunday. And there was something that really worried me. 40% of our people did not vote, abstained. Unthinkable back in 75. I think this tells a lot about skepticism on the functioning of democracy, which is not exclusive to my country, Portugal, which is actually, you can go about it throughout Europe. And actually, some guys say, oh, well, this is the normal thing. Look at the rates of our participation in places like the US. But in Europe, I think this is, and especially for newly democratic countries, it's worrying. And it tells a lot about the difficulties we are going through in Europe, in indeed delivering the answers that the citizens need. This has a lot to do with the economic crisis and the way we have been unable to tackle the problems. And you look at these squares in Porta del Sol in Spain and those indignados in revolted people, that tells a lot about how citizens are looking at our democracy. So I would say this has to also have a reflex in the way we deal with the wave of democracy in our neighborhood. And I must say, I'm glad that we in the European Union started indeed to acknowledge that we made many mistakes. We had just outlined this review of the European neighborhood policy, which is not just towards the east, but also towards the south, acknowledging that indeed we did not live up to our values and commitments in terms of democracy and human rights. We often let our security, so supposedly security, regional security concerns prevail. We let our commercial or trade interests prevail, and we did not indeed put democracy at the center. And indeed, democracy is the only system that will also allow us to tackle all the other and to push forward with all our other interests. I think now in dealing with, and I very much agree with the way both Minister Sikorsky and Ambassador Feinstein have put it, from Belarus to Benghazi. We need to actually work on a transatlantic level to coordinate, as Ambassador Feinstein put it, to review our policies, what we did wrong, and actually extend this ride from Belarus to Benghazi to Burma, where we should go alone, one or the other. It's about indeed refining, reviewing the strategy and doing what it takes. In the European Parliament, I can tell you that we are working hard already, and I can tell Minister Sikorsky that his idea that he mentioned, that the Polish presidency undertook of creating a European Endowment for Democracy has already been adopted in the Commission on Foreign Affairs of the European Parliament. So hopefully we will formally adopt it during the Polish presidency, and we'll see it being operationalized because it's absolutely urgent and we are actually without any reluctance actually following an American model, which is good and which is very interesting. And those of us who have been following exactly and seeing how can we be of assistance to those civil societies who have made the Tahrir Square and all these revolutions in the Arab world, to actually, what can we do? And I must say that the first thing we need to do is indeed empower civil society, see how we can help civil society create political parties is a priority. You won't have democracy in those countries without political parties, and many of the political parties, the new political parties aren't yet there. It's a priority. It's good, for instance, that in Tunisia they have postponed the elections so that there will be time. This is also the concern in Egypt. Empowering the political parties is a crucial thing. Helping create democratic political powers. Then, of course, all these basic freedoms that are essential to democracy. And I would say, also based in our experience in Portugal, that freedom of information is the number one. And I fully support Minister Sikorsky when he says the crucial role played by Al Jazeera. I've been recently living in Benghazi myself, and indeed, Al Jazeera has been fantastically reporting about what is going on, and it has tremendous impact in all these repercussions throughout the Arab world. And of course, I think a very, very important thing is also helping, collaborating with those who are in the lead now in these countries to share indeed our experience. They are looking at our experience of those countries like Poland and Portugal who transition from dictatorship towards democracy.
I wanted just to go outside on this point on what can we do to someone outside government, to Roel van Meijenveld, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, who is the who chairs the European Partnership for Democracy. And you heard a little bit now about the European Endowment for Democracy. In your long experience in this, in trying to do this outside government, is this a good model for Europe? How should it be different from the National Endowment for Democracy? And does Europe have a different model, actually, of of democracy promotion than America does?
Well, thank you very much, Matt. Let me first say how pleased I am that I'm in Wroclaw today. As I learned from the mayor, it's the Polish China. And it reminded me that economic development and political development go hand in hand. And democracy and economic development are not contrary to each other. And I hope that one day this message also reaches the full China, and that our American friends and European friends can work together to that end. But yes, I have been in the democracy support for many years, and I've worked closely together with the American institutions in this field, and have been working for some time also to try to establish European counterparts for the American institutions, because it has been quite annoying to see how flexible and responsive American institutions operate. And within Europe, we have our national institutions, but we don't have European institutions. And yet, democracy, human rights are core values of the European Union. Our prosperity and peace is built on democracy. And as we have learned from Minister Sikorski and Anna, there is a lot of experience to share from Europe with our counterparts outside of Europe. But that experience is not being made available at the European level. And secondly, the way Europe disperses its resources is not always very productive in supporting democracy. As we know, and we have discussed it before at this important forum, the windows of opportunity for democratic reforms are often very brief. And you need to be there when the transformation is happening. And you have to be there actually already before to support democracy activists. And you have to be very creative in providing that support. That cannot always be done by formal institutions. And hence, our friends in the United States have realized that, and they have their institutions who operate in their own autonomy, in close cooperation with official institutions, but they have their integrity to provide that assistance. And in Europe, we don't have that. So that was the reason why, under the leadership of Václav Havel, we established the European Partnership for Democracy, which until this stage is a small organization because it has not yet the resources in order to be really a partner of our American sister organizations. And therefore, I also welcome very much the initiative by Minister Sikorski to put momentum into this new international context in which the Arab Street has put democracy back on our agendas. And it are our Islam friends, so to speak, who have put democracy. It's an irony of history, but I think, as Fred Kemp said this morning, it's the most important geostrategic development since the end of the Cold War, and we should seize that opportunity. And I would argue that indeed we need to fast-track it, because also the Polish presidency will only last 6 months. And those will be very busy 6 months for the Polish presidency. I know from experience from other presidencies. Time is short, and I think with the support of the European Parliament, this is the moment to seize and to ensure that before the end of the presidency, we have the new initiative up and running so that it can be implemented and we can be delivering on the commitment of the European Union. So this should be done in tandem with the institutions, but the way the institutions operate, they cannot deliver what is most needed when transitions take place. And I think that gap needs to be filled. And from our experience, Europe has that experience. It can be done.
Thank you. I was thrilled to see Adam Michnik on this panel because I think no one else here, probably in this room and certainly beyond as well, can provide the kind of perspective that he can on the history of this country, but also the history of what we've been talking about. And I guess the main question I have for you is, does this feel like 1989 to you?
W tym sensie mam podobne wrażenie, że
as 1989, that I feel that I observe a certain miracle when I started to watch TV
demonstracje
And so the
w
demonstrations in
Tunezji,
Tunisia,
potem w Egipcie,
then in Egypt, then
w Libii,
in Libya,
potem w Maroko,
and next in Morocco,
potem w Syrii,
then in
potem w
Syria, and
Jemenie,
in
to
Yemen,
rzeczywiście
then indeed
przypominało
it
cud
made me, it
80.
reminded me the miracle of 1989.
Drugi cud
Is
jest
the
taki, że
second
te
miracle. There is also the
20
second
lat
miracle that over the
nauczyło
last 20 years
nas takiego
we were able
dosyć
to learn
pragmatycznego i
a
cynicznego
quite pragmatic and quite
myślenia o
cynical way
polityce.
of thinking about
W
politics.
ostatnim czasie
Within the recent
przemówieniu
years,
prezydenta Obamy
in the speech
w
by
Warszawie,
President
w
Obama
dzisiejszym
in
przemówieniu
Warsaw,
prezydenta
in today's
Komorowskiego
speech by President
usłyszeliśmy
Komorowski,
takie oczywiste,
we've heard some
autentyczne odwołanie
obvious,
się do wartości.
authentic call for
Że
values.
polityka nie jest tylko
Politics
grą
is not only a
interesu.
game of interest.
Nie jest tylko
It's not only
sprytnym
a
zabieganiem
very cunning
o pieniądze.
game
Jest
for
czymś
money.
więcej. I to ważne
It's
jest,
something more, and it is very
że to,
important
co się stało,
that what
zmieniło
has happened has
klimat.
changed the climate for these
Bardzo
issues.
ważne dla mnie
It is also very important for me
było to, co prezydent Obama
what I've heard
mówił
from President Obama speaking
polskim
about Polish
dziennikarzu
journalist
Gazety
of
Wyborczej,
Wyborcza
który jest uwięziony
magazine, who is imprisoned
białoruskim
in
więzieniu.
Belarus.
I to jest następnie słuchanie istotny przekaz.
And there is a very important
Przekaz
message here,
polegający
a
na
message
że
consisting in the fact
suwerenność
that the
państwa
independence of the
nie polega na
state
tym,
does not
że
only
władza państwowa
consist in
może
the
suwerennie zamykać
state's
swoich obywateli
power
do
can
więzienia,
imprison
a suwerenność polega na
citizens.
tym, że nikt z zewnątrz do tego nie może
Independence
się
is that
wtrącać.
nobody can try to
Wreszcie, co
interfere
dla
here.
mnie było
Eventually, what was
niesłychanie istotne, to jest
incredibly
odwołanie
important
się,
for me
to
was this
dzisiaj o tym
reference.
mówił bardzo plastycznie
It was
pan
mentioned
minister
by Minister Sikorski
odwołanie się
today.
pozytywne do polskiego
That
doświadczenia.
there is this reference
Dlaczego
to
to
our
dla mnie jest
Polish
tak
experience.
pozytywne?
Why it is so positive
Dlatego,
for me?
że w naszym
Because in
kraju
our
dzisiaj
country today,
trwa gwałtowna polemika.
there is a very
było te
vivid
20 lat?
polemics. What happened
To jest
with the recent
20
20 years?
lat
What
sukcesu
is it a very successful period, the
naszego
last
kraju,
20
który
years for our country?
pokojowo zdemontował dyktaturę.
Because we managed to
I
disassemble dictatorship.
Pokojowo. Przy oczywiście
and
pan
very
minister
peacefully.
i potknięciach i błędach, ale
We made
zbudował
many mistakes and had
demokratyczne
many failures, but
państwo prawa
we built
i dobrą
peacefully a
gospodarkę.
democratic
Czy też,
country and good
jak chcą
economy.
niektórzy
Or
w
maybe,
naszym
as some
kraju
people
niestety
claim in
dość
our
liczni,
country, there are
mamy do
quite
czynienia z
many of
katastrofą.
them. We are facing a certain catastrophe, a collapse
Ostatnie
of our
20
country during the last 20
z państwem,
years.
które utraciło
So from
suwerenność, które swoich
did our country
obywateli
lose its
głodzi
independence,
i
sovereignty?
prześladuje. Otóż
Who is hunting us
ton,
now?
który ja
So
słyszę,
what
kiedy
I
jestem
hear,
w
the tone when I
Waszyngtonie
hear
czy w
when I'm in
Moskwie,
Washington or in
Polska ma
Moscow,
sukces.
Poland is
I
a
dla
successful
mnie
country.
ta debata
And
jest
for me, this debate
potwierdzeniem tego, tym bardziej,
is just
że
confirmation
Polska
of the
zerwała z
statement.
pewnym
Because
kodem
Poland
historycznym swoich tradycji.
broke down with a certain
Ten
historical
kod
code of its
historyczny
traditions. This historical
Polski
code
to były
of Poland
permanentne
were permanent
konspiracje,
conspiracies,
insurekcje, które
insurrections,
zawsze
uprisings,
przegrywaliśmy, a
which
potem
we have always
ogłaszaliśmy,
failed,
że
and
nasze
then we were
moralne
announcing
zwycięstwo.
that it was our moral
Tym razem
victory.
my nie mamy żadnego
And this
moralnego
time, we don't have
zwycięstwa, mamy
any moral
realne
victory. We have a very
zwycięstwo.
real success, very
Te
real
20
victory.
lat
The last
to
20
jest,
years,
powtarzam to uparcie, to jest
and I will
najlepsze
insist on
20
it.
lat, jakie
It's
Polska
been the
miała
best 20
przez
years
ostatnie
Poland
4
has
stulecia.
had for
Przed
the
jedną
last 400
rzeczą
years.
bym przestrzegał,
However,
bo w
I would
Polsce jest
warn
takie
you against one thing, because in
zagrożenie. My nie
Poland there is
możemy w tym
a slight risk here.
regionie
In our region, we cannot
trzymać mentalności starszego brata.
maintain the
Nasi
mentality of our elder
sąsiedzi
brother. Our
już mieli
neighbors
dostateczną ilość
have had
starszych
a
braci
sufficient
i oni
number of elder
jeszcze
brothers, and
jednego
they
nie
don't
chcą.
need another
Natomiast
one.
oczywiście
Of
doświadczenie
course,
polskie jest
Polish
fascynujące dla
experience is
tych krajów.
fascinating for other countries.
Niedawno miałem okazję być
Recently, I had the chance
w
to
Birmie.
be in Burma.
Wszyscy, łącznie z
Everyone,
noblistką,
including the Nobel Prize winner,
rozpytywali się z wielkim
were asking
zaciekawieniem, jak
me
wam się
and were
udało.
really interested how did
Podobne
you manage to
doświadczenie
succeed.
miałem osobistego
And
w Chinach.
I had a similar experience in
tutaj jest
China as
jedna
well.
rzecz niezwykle
So
ważna,
one thing is
że
really
musimy stale
important here that we
pamiętać, bo
have to
to jest
remember, continue to
być może
remember.
najtrudniejsza
Maybe this is the
pułapka dla
most
dla
difficult,
polityki.
the easiest
Otóż,
trap for a
polityka
politician.
oczywiście nie składa się,
Politics is not only about,
odnotowuję z radością,
and I'm very glad to say that, it's not only
cynicznej
about a cynical
gry, z
game
pragmatycznych działań, ale
and
składa się również
some
z
very
wartości, ale też
superficial
nie składa się
activities.
z samych wartości.
It has
W
also,
polityce istnieje
it also has a
napięcie
certain content. There is
między
a certain
etyką przekonań, a
certain
etyką
tension between
odpowiedzialności.
Responsibility
I teraz
and one's beliefs.
pierwsza moja
And my
uwaga na
first
temat
remark related
byłaby
to,
taka.
to
Obserwujemy
your question. We
Ukrainę
observe
z wielkim
Ukraine. We've been observing Ukraine with a great
i
interest.
jesteśmy zdania,
And our opinion
że
is that
rząd prezydenta
the
Janukowycza
government of
dokonał
President Yanukovych
istotnych, pozytywnych kroków w
made
dziedzinie
several positive steps
gospodarczej.
as regards
Ale mimo
economy.
to nie należy
Even
zapominać, że
though
w tym samym
we should not
czasie
forget that
Ukrainie
simultaneously, at the same time in
postępuje
Ukraine,
proces
we
ograniczenia
have
swobód
proceeding
demokratycznych,
action
są
of limiting
podejmowane
civil
działania,
freedoms. There are certain activities
godzą
undertaken
w niezależne media i tak dalej.
when independent
Mnie się
medias
wydaje,
are
że to
closed, etc. So I
wymyślać
think
jakiś
that
taki balans równowagi.
we
Może
have to
to
get a
mniej
certain
zależy od
balance
rządu,
here. Maybe it
a więcej
depends
od
less
instytucji
on the
społeczeństwa
government, more on this
obywatelskiego, żeby
civil society
władze
institution,
ukraińskie
so that
czuły
Ukrainian
ten
authorities
gorący oddech
could
europejskiej
feel
opinii
the
publicznej na plecy.
hot breath of
To jest ważne, że
Ukrainian public
rezolucja, która
on
napiętuje
their back, at their back.
te wydarzenia
I think
jest
that the
zawsze
public that
ważna dla europejskich.
complains about
I
what happens in
wystrzegałbym się
Ukraine is
takiego
very important.
rozumowania, jeżeli
So I would
jakiś
prefer to
rząd
beware
jest prozachodni czy
that if
proamerykański,
any
właściwie nas
government
już
is
nie interesuje,
pro-Western
co
or
się tam
pro-American.
wewnątrz dzieje, tak jak w
We
słynnym
don't want to know anymore
Roosevelta
what's happening inside, as Roosevelt once stated about Somoza.
Skurwysyn.
So it's a son of a bitch, but it's our son of a bitch. Son of a bitch is always a son of a bitch. It doesn't matter whether it is ours or somebody else's. So just to sum up,
padło dla Wrocławia bardzo
there was
komplementujące
a very
stwierdzenie, że to
nice
polskie
statement
Chiny.
about Wrocław,
Otóż ja
that
jestem
it's Polish
entuzjastą
China. I'm
Wrocławia,
very
ale to nie są
enthusiastic about Wrocław,
polskie
but these
Chiny,
are
bo
not
we
Polish. It is
Wrocławiu
not
nikogo
Polish China.
nie zamyka się do
We
więzień.
don't close anyone in
Ani
prisons in
laureatów Nagrody
Wrocław.
Nobla, ani
Nor the
artystów.
awardees
I to jest
of the Nobel
niesłychanie
Prize, nor
ważne,
artists. And this is
że,
crucial. It's really important
uczymy się
that we keep
na te
learning
sprawy patrzeć razem. I ostatnio już
to
rzeczywiście
observe these issues
uwaga.
together in conjunctions with other states. And the last remark,
biznes
business
i demokracja.
and democracy.
Otóż dla mnie
For me,
takim przykładem ścisłego związku
there is an example of very close relationship
sprawa
between the two.
Chodorkowskiego.
It's the
znaczy, w
Hodorkovsky
jaki
case.
sposób
How
państwo,
the state
które ma fasadę
that has
demokratyczną,
this facade
brutalnie
of democratic
wkracza w
state
gospodarkę
is so
rynkową
brutal to
i
intervene in
niszczy. Ja myślę, że są,
in
jak
economy
dziś spoglądam, widzę takie dwa modele
destroys
zagrożeń
it. There are two models of risks
dla
that we have
demokracji, bo
against
wspólnota
democracy.
transatlantycka
There's
to
this
jest wspólnota
transatlantic
wolności.
community, which is a community of
To
freedom, isn't it?
narody, które
And the nations
walczą
that
o wolność,
fight
w
for
dużej mierze
freedom.
wywalczyły ją.
they
Spoglądając
managed to gain it.
na
They were
siebie
successful in
nawzajem,
gaining it
chcą
to a
być
large extent.
razem, bo chcą
And they want to
żyć
be together
wolności
because they want to live their
i
freedom.
wolności bronić.
And they want to protect this freedom as well.
Otóż mnie się wydaje, że jak patrzę
And
na
I think when I look
Europę,
at Europe,
to widzę dwa
can see
modele,
two models.
jak wolność niszczeje.
How freedom is
Pierwszy
being destroyed. The
nazywam
first is,
putinizmem.
I called it
I
Putinism.
klasykiem tego gatunku jest oczywiście Aleksander
And
Łukaszenka.
Alexander Lukashenko
drugi
is a
nazywam
perfect example here.
berlusconizmem.
Berlusconism
I to
is the
jest
second model.
oczywiście
And of
największy
It
europejski
is the
specjalista
largest
od
European
Bunga.
specialist from
Otóż mnie się wydaje, że trzeba się
the
uważnie
scandals.
przyjrzeć,
I think that we
jak
have to have a
te
very close look
dwa
how these two
fenomeny
phenomena
mogą rozwijać się
can continue to develop.
początkowo niepostrzeżenie na naszej części
In
kontynentu.
our part of continent.
Czytam
For
komentarze,
example,
niestety
I
czasem
read
nawet
some
w gazecie, którą redaguję.
commentaries, unfortunately
tego,
also in the
co
magazine
się
that I am
na
the editor-in-chief.
A się tam nic złego się nie dzieje.
What
To
happens in the, oh,
liberałowie
it's nothing
histeryzują.
wrong.
To się
Liberals
w
are
porządku
getting
jest.
into
Nie
hysteria.
jest.
In general, everything is okay. It is not okay.
Thomas Jefferson
Thomas Jefferson
powiedział, że wolne
said
narody
that
bardziej
free
potrzebują
nations need more
niezależnej gazety niż rządu.
independent magazine than the
bez rządu
government.
ludzie mogą
Without
żyć.
government,
Bez
people are able to
niezależnych
live.
źródeł
Without
informacji
independent
żyć
sources
nie
of
mogą.
information, nations cannot
Jeżeli
survive.
w naszym kraju
If in our
te
country
rozwiązania
these
Viktora
solutions
Orbana
of
mają
Viktor Orban,
entuzjastów, ja czytam
they have
zbiorowe
some enthusiasm. I
listy
can
popierające.
read some
Ja widzę,
letters that support
czego oni
him.
są dla mojego kraju.
I can see how important they are for my country, and this is a risk.
Pan
Thank you
też
very much.
często pisał
You write quite often in a different context that Polish has some Homo Sovieticus genes, and it's probably also has these democratic genes. And I'm very curious to find out why some countries succeed in this democratic transition and some countries failed in democratic transitions. What was the key?
To jest kwestia kultury,
Is it an issue of culture, of leadership, or something else?
Matthew Kamiński
wants
ze mnie wyzwolić to, co starannie w sobie ukrywa,
from me
czyli
what I've been
ciemnego
trying to hide very
polskiego
much, a
nacjonalistę.
dark Polish nationalist.
No więc coś z
Pure
tego jest.
nationalist. So what have we got here?
Jest w polskiej
Indeed, in
tradycji
Polish tradition we have this very deeply enrooted
kultura godności
culture of
osobistej,
personal dignity,
kultura dążenia
and
do
culture
wolności. To jest ciekawe bardzo, dlatego że
aiming to freedom. It's very interesting because this layer of aristocrats that were in charge, were governing Poland, has virtually been killed out.
w dużej mierze chłopski naród.
So in majority we are a nation of farmers, but this farmers nation absorbed the culture of aristocrats, and as we used to say that an aristocrat in its own castle is equal to a governor,
chłop potęgą jest i basta.
and farmers, peasants used to say that peasants are a power, and that's it. Indeed, a Polish society is a society which is really difficult to be governed. De Gaulle once said that it's difficult to govern French because they are a nation who has 300 brands of cheese.
Pani Aung San Suu Kyi mi powiedziała, że Birmańczycy są jak po Polacy.
told me that
Gdzie dwóch Polaków,
Burmans are
trzy
like
partie
Poles. Where there are two Poles, we have 3 political parties, and I corrected that there are even 4. Indeed, Poles succeeded. Poland succeeded, not entirely, of course, because I keep repeating to our neighbors who are so delighted with Poland that the ground is always greener on the other side of the fence.
Jeszcze tutaj mamy masę rzeczy do załatwienia.
As a matter of fact, we have lots of issues to be dealt with. We also have many
podstaw do niepokoju i do
reasons
obaw.
to be worried.
Dlatego, że
And to have our concerns because this populistic wave does not omit Poland. However, we succeeded, and this is beyond the question because we managed to repeat the Spanish model. It was a very cruel war. There was a lot of hatred, and at a certain point we understood that everyone
Władza jest za
we are
słaba,
all too weak.
żeby zniszczyć
Authority, power is the government is too weak to destroy solidarity, and solidarity is too weak to abolish authorities.
Do tego dodać
And if we add here that this conflict from the point of view of power, of government, was increasingly destructive, and in our communist government, it was the very same who would imprison us. So they suddenly started to think that perhaps it is better to start talking with these people rather than keep them in prison. So together with my friends, we've noticed that was this moment when communists stopped being only a tool in the hands of Moscow, and they became accomplices in creating our common Polish way, Polish history. Not everybody wanted to get revenge, and Poland succeeded here better than some other countries. However, it doesn't mean that in a year or in 4 years that we might not to fall into this trap as the Hungary or Greece. I hope not Greece fell in. We have the member of the parliament from Portugal, Ana Gomes, and you are perfectly aware that you have this euphoria of freedom. In Poland, we've always been very happy because of Salazar's accident. Then we are happy that power over Portugal was not overtaken. Then we are glad that Portugal is successful. And today we are worried, we are all concerned that Portugal is in trouble. That Portuguese society did not approve this difficult program, restructuring program, and we are still glad that in Poland very often unpopular for our government decisions that are unpopular but unnecessary are accepted. However, there are people who would love to use it to abolish the government that we have now. Just to close, I want to say that with my entire optimism, I can see in my country, of course, people are not only afraid, they are terrified sometimes. The polarization is so clear. If leaders of the largest opposition party say that our Prime Minister, together with Prime Minister Putin, led Poland, practically to kill president in Smolensk. If they claim that there is no independent Poland because there is a cooperation between Germany and Russia, we are dealing here with a madness of hatred. It can explode at a certain point, but I do believe in the wisdom of my nations, because as you have discovered, I am an oblivious, dark Polish chauvinist, and I do believe in it. As towarzysz Stalin would say that citizens just be alert.
I think you've made some news here to expose Adam as a Polish nationalist. But Minister Sikorski, do you think there's a democracy gene, and if so, do the Arabs have it?
I think there is a democracy gene, but I think all people have it because it's a very fundamental desire of people wanting to control their destiny, both at the individual level and collectively. And democracy is about that, having influence over decisions about a society that I live in. So I think it's a universal human longing, and therefore no culture is excluded from it. The question is, in what conditions can it flourish? I read an interesting article recently by a French demographer, I think, who says that in the Arab world, it happens, the gene is released when you pass a certain proportion of people who can read and write, and when the proportion of girls marrying their first cousins drops below a certain number, because that releases that creates freedom in the family and allows for free choices. And in general, I believe that the position of women in Islam is key to releasing the democratic aspirations of Arab people. And in fact, that much of Islamic radicalism is about that, about the fear of some men of losing control over their women. So yes, there are cultural factors, but the longing is universal, and what we can help is on the margin increase the chances of success, because we don't know what we have in the Arab world, whether this is 1848, whether I doubt this is 1989. I rather suspect that at least in some countries, this is 1980. The release of democratic aspirations that is then suppressed for a while by the forces of reaction. But what we discovered in 1980-81, even after the imposition of martial law, is that once you have to impose your authority by force, you've lost your legitimacy. And you can only maintain that for a decade or so. So we need to be prepared for the long march, and hence the proposal for a European endowment for democracy.
That's really fascinating, the demographic numbers you mentioned. I never heard that before. And it makes one think, how differently should we, I guess this question maybe for everyone here, but how differently should we structure these programs to promote civic society, to promote freedom of the speech in the Arab world, in dealing with the media or trying to, spread women's rights? How different should that be there than we did here? What sort of, I don't know if you've given this much thought yet, but...
Well, I think it's much easier now. When I was an exile in Britain in the 1980s, I had to send books that were not censored inside washing powder, boxes of washing powder. And in 1984, I sent a box with Persil, and I would slit it aside, put the books in, and then glue it back on. And we had these parcels collected in Poznan by my grandfather on the grounds that he was too old to be imprisoned. And once the parcel was discovered, and hence I have in my family archive a receipt from the Communist Customs Office of the book by George Orwell, 1984, confiscated in 1984. And of course, today this sounds ludicrous and crude. And once you've said it, you see how easy it is today to spread free information.
I assume you have that framed on your wall somewhere? And I wonder, maybe Roel, you want to address this. What is the, how do we push democracy differently, perhaps, in the Arab world than we do?
Well, I think it should start, and there's also a lesson, of course, learned in this part of the world, Poland, and with other countries in Central Eastern Europe as well, is to recognize the authenticity of the reform process in that country. It's been driven by local people, and I think that's where the support for democracy starts. If you allow me, there's often referred to promoting the values or the promoting democracy, but as the minister very correctly says, it's a universal gene, democracy. The aspiration of people is there. We don't need to promote the aspiration. We need to support the aspiration to become reality. And I think the focus should be much more, and that's why we are so happy with the initiative of Minister Sikorski, very much on how we provide that support. And one of the issues, for myself, I make a distinction between, say, pre-Tahrir and post-Tahrir. preterir is to assist the democratic reformers under often very difficult circumstances. We can do much better and prepare a new political elite for the moment, for the Tahrir moment, because then it becomes difficult to construct a roadmap on how to move away from the former autocratic regimes into a democratic dispensation. We see that in Tunisia and Egypt, and people are very badly prepared. And I think that's where we come in to assist our friends based on already established relationship, trusted relationship, provide mentorship, provide a longer-term perspective of what is required to really seize that momentum and make it a durable, sustainable democratic transition. And that takes, as the minister says, 10, 20 years. We have only started that process. And it may turn into a fourth wave of democracy, but we need to support it professionally. And it's not just dishing out money to a whole array of projects. It is to assist the local owners of that transition to set an agenda and then provide the assistance on the various aspects of that agenda. So democracy support for me is not so much project cycles, but it's agenda setting and to assist in the implementation of those agendas and to assure that the ownership stays with those people who are responsible for the process. And therefore it's support rather than pushing from the outside. And it can be done. There are many successful examples where, for example, 20 years ago, South Africa was another example where there was no attraction for membership of the European Union. Because most countries today who are on the verge of moving towards democracy have no perspective of joining the European Union. So we need to apply a different methodology and different concept. And I believe we have that concept, and I would very much like to share that also with Minister Sikorski in his efforts to establish the European Endowment for Democracy so that we can move fast and implement this new facility that is being created.
Well, I'd like to come on this and recalling that indeed I agree that democracy is a human gene. It's human, where despite the cultures, and there's no other way to actually develop it and cultivate it than by practicing democracy. There's no way to learn democracy in the books. You learn democracy by practicing. I could not at all agree with the former dictator in my country who used to say that we were too poor or too underdeveloped or whatever to afford this luxury of democracy. Democracy is not a luxury, it's something you can cultivate by practicing. And this should be guiding us indeed in the interaction with these emerging democracies in the Arab world. And I believe that indeed, I mentioned earlier, the freedom of information, the role of political parties, but of course the central question is civil society, is empowering civil society. And I very much agree with Minister Sikorski that the role of women is absolutely central in the Islamic societies. And that's where indeed all the efforts for education, information, organization, participation, we should focus on that. If we manage to succeed on that, we will make a fantastic contribution for indeed rooting democracy in those societies. Then the other thing is delivering economically. Don't forget that these revolutions from Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia to now to in Syria and in Yemen, so it's about dignity, it's about work opportunities, it's about economic opportunities, it's about fighting corruption. Another central question we need to put in our strategy to promote democracy, it's about fighting corruption. By the way, we don't need it only there, we need it here. Much of the disappointment of our people for the way our democracies are working has to do with corruption, with the way we, and that has a lot to do with the way the measures for the economic crisis are not working. By the way, in Mr. Michnik, in my country, in the end, the results of these elections last Sunday proved that 78% of the people are in favor, understand the need for these sacrifices, are in favor. They voted for the parties who committed to this program with the EU that means austerity, but also the question is, People have to see the light at the end of the tunnel. People have to see that these sacrifices are worth it. So it is a crucial question in Europe as much as in the Arab world. Otherwise, we will see the populists, the Berlusconists and so on, creating all this fuss about elements which are not indeed crises, ridiculous, complaining about some 30,000 people who come, as most of them as refugees, economic migrants as well, from the instability now in Libya, in Tunisia and elsewhere. While Tunisia itself has took more than 10 times of refugees from Libya. It's absolutely ridiculous. We cannot allow these populists to indeed take advantage of our democratic debate to make this a problem. And the only way, actually, to stop migrants from coming, and of course in this case, the north of Africa, we have to distinguish migrants and refugees. But migrants from coming is actually to make sure that they share as well our prosperity. So economic delivery is a crucial question for democracies as well.
Let me just turn briefly to Adam, and then I'll open up the floor. Minister Sikorski mentioned there are other dates we should be thinking about, perhaps. And what if this is really 1918, and instead of the rise of the red menace, we have the rise of the green menace along the world? How do we respond? What makes you confident that's not really what's going on here?
Which green menace do you have in mind? The one in Germany?
the more original green. Wilfred Medina, go ahead.
Oczywiście podobieństwem jest to, że to się w sposób całkowicie nieoczekiwany, nieprzewidywany przez żadnych, to o tym dziś mówił prezydent Komorowski, że nie było takich mądrali w 1988 roku, że przewidywali, że ten proces ruszy nagle jak lawina, tak jak nie było teraz mądrali, że nagle w świecie arabskim się stanie coś całkowicie nieprzewidywalnego. I to jest pewna lekcja. To jest pewna lekcja dla nas wszystkich. Po pierwsze, żyjemy w świecie, w który jest wpisana socjologia niespodzianki. Kładziemy się spać w jednym kraju, budzimy się w zupełnie innym. I myśmy w Polsce to niejednokrotnie przerabiali na własnej skórze. Nikt się nie spodziewał Poznania w 1956 roku. Nikt się nie spodziewał studenckiej rewolty w 1968 roku. To było dla wszystkich ogromne zaskoczenie i dla nas samych też. Trzeba powiedzieć to otwarcie. Po drugie, musimy mieć świadomość, że w naszych demokracjach jest cała masa takiej mierzy. To, co mnie od wielu lat doprowadza do wściekłości, to taka europejska moda na antyamerykanizm. Mnie to doprowadza do absolutnej wściekłości. Ja nawet wybitni pisarze europejscy potrafią mówić, że archipelag Gulag i CIA to jedno i to samo. Ja nie mogę tego słuchać po prostu dlatego, że Polakiem jestem, że się ukształtowałem w tej rzeczywistości i tak dalej. Więc to drugie. Trzecie, że są takie mity z jednej strony fundamentalizmu islamskiego, który rzeczywiście prowadzi do fanatyzmu, który rzeczywiście pozwala, nie wiem jak to nazwać, ale jakby wyzwala taki gen samounicestwienia, że jest coś pozytywnego w zadawaniu sobie śmierci przez kobietę ciężarną, jeżeli ona będzie mogła zabić wrogów prawdziwych czy wyimaginowanych islamu. Z drugiej strony obserwujemy taki mechanizm typowy dla wszystkich modernizacji, że nagle świat przestaje być stabilny, stało się zaczyna ruszać i wtedy całe grupy ludzkie ogarnia niepokój, lęk, świat przestaje być zrozumiały i to jest taki moment, kiedy wchodzą najrozmaitsze ideologie, które mają przywracać stabilność. I w Polsce taką pseudo-ideologią jest na przykład katolicki fundamentalizm spod znaku Radia Maryja. To dzisiaj zresztą się pojawiło takie określenie religia smoleńska. To nie jest religia katolicka, tylko religia smoleńska. Otóż mnie się wydaje, że jeżeli z tej perspektywy europejskiej właśnie popatrzeć na kraje arabskie, to oczywiście tam będzie inaczej. Niemniej jednak jest dla mnie ogromnie cenna i mój akt wiary to jest to, co powiedział już pan minister Sikorski, że nie ma tak, że są narody, które nie lubią tortur i są takie, które lubią tortury, bo na nic innego nie zasługują. Pani Gomez mówiła o słowach Salazara, że Portugalii nie stać na luksus demokracji. Ja to słyszałem przez cały okres komunistycznej dyktatury w moim kraju. Ale też słyszałem o opinii angielskie, francuskie, że właściwie oczywiście dla nas, dla Francuzów, dla Anglików demokracja to niezbędna jest. No, my jesteśmy cywilizowani ludzie. No, ale dla tej Polski barbarii, dla nacji, która potrzebuje demokracji tylko po to, żeby urządzać pogromy antyżydowskie, no nie, no, jaka demokracja? Jaka demokracja? I tutaj zawsze będzie konflikt pomiędzy chęcią stabilności, strachem przed chaosem, przed destabilizacją, a między wiernością, wartością demokratyczną. Ja potrafię zrozumieć logikę porozumienia jałtańskiego. Że Ameryka już nie chciała wojny, Wielka Brytania nie chciała wojny. Okej, niech tego pilnuje Stalin, bo nie wiadomo, co tutaj te narody nawyrabiają. Ale to, czego nie umiem zrozumieć, to jest nazywanie konieczności cnotą. I mówię, myśmy zrobili jak najlepiej. Nie zrobiliście jak najlepiej. Sprzedaliście Polskę. No trzeba to po imieniu nazwać. A teraz jak ktoś zrobi coś bardzo złego i potem odczuwa wstyd, do tego trafia niesłychanie skomplikowaną ideologię. My to też znamy z naszej historii, z naszych relacji polsko-ukraińskich, czy polsko-białoruskich, czy polsko-litewskich, czy wreszcie polsko-żydowskich. Jest coś takiego, jak głęboko kultywowany, zwłaszcza w narodach poddanych dyktaturze, kompleks niewinnej ofiary. To jest bardzo niebezpieczny kompleks i głęboko antydemokratyczny. Dlatego, że on blokuje możliwość krytycznej refleksji na swój własny temat. Krytycznej samooceny, żeby powiedzieć na końcu jeszcze, uważam, że w naszym regionie, chociaż wiem, że tu wielu na tej sali się naraża, w naszym regionie żaden naród nie poszedł tak daleko w krytycznej samorefleksji, jak my Polacy. Jakby byłem niedawno w Rumunii i się chwaliłem moim rumuńskim przyjaciołom, że przygotowałem i opublikowałem 3-tomową grubą antologię przeciw antysemityzmowi. jeden z moich
volumes of
świetnie, mamy to w Rumunii,
anti-Semitism
musimy to zrobić.
book on
Następnego dnia
anti-Semitism, and
spotykamy
one
się,
of my
mówimy,
Romanian colleagues says,
Rumunii
well, we need to do that, we need to do the same. And
3000 stron przeciwko antysemityzmowi nie. To niemożliwe.
my Romanian said
Ja w
it's
Polsce
impossible
znalazłem.
to find in Romania
pan sądzi, że
3,000 pages on
idea
anti-Semitism. I
muzułmańskiej
found that in
demokracji
Poland.
to jest
Do you
oksymoron
believe
w tym
that
sensie?
Nie.
the idea of
Nie.
Muslim
Nie.
democracy is an oxymoron? No,
Same zadanie pytania jest absurdalne,
well, I
bo
think
mamy
it's an
muzułmańskie
absurd
demokracje. Turcja,
question.
Indonezja,
We do
120
have
milionów
Muslim
muzułmanów w
democracy.
Indiach. No, nie
Turkey,
obrażajmy wielkiej,
Indonesia,
starożytnej
120
cywilizacji, która przeszła przez trudny okres, ale mam nadzieję, że w tej chwili znowu
Muslims in
wraca
India, an old
do bardziej
culture, an old
żywotnego
democracy. I think
Ale Turcja
there is some sort of revival.
Jeżeli judaizm może
Well,
współżyć
if
z
Judaism
demokracją, znaczy, że każda religia
can somehow work together with a democracy, any religion may do that.
In Indonesia, recently, a book was published by the major leader Gus Mus of the major Muslim organization, the Nahdlatul Ulama, which is more than 50 million Muslims. And the book is about the nonsense of an Islamic state based on the interpretations that are made there about Islam. I think it's very...
Natomiast, jeśli mogę dodać przypis, powiem to po polsku, bo chcę się odnieść do tego, co powiedział
To say a couple of words in Polish, because I want to
Sądzę, że w Polsce
comment
rzeczywiście
on
mamy
Mr.
niebezpieczeństwo
Michnik's
szyizmu. Mówię to nie jako obelgę,
comments.
tylko jako analizę.
In Poland, we have
Mianowicie
this
ruchu,
problem with
który
Shiism, understanding
jest
Shiism.
tak
This is a
zafiksowany
movement
na
fixed
cierpieniach,
so much
na poczuciu
on,
straty.
the sense
I
of
tak
loss
nie może
and
odpuścić tego, że to staje się
martyrology.
zaczątkiem
They really
czegoś
can't
niebezpiecznego.
give it up.
Na
And
tym jest
this may
oparty szyizm
give
irański
rise, and this is
i wiemy, że do
the actual
dzisiaj to, co
foundation
się stało
of the
1400
Iranian
lat
Shiism.
temu,
What happened
morderstwo na proroku
1,400 years
imamie
ago,
Alim,
the murder
to jest coś,
on
czego nadal nie mogą,
Ali Imam.
nad czym nie mogą przejść do porządku
They
dziennego i to
can't
w jakimś
really
sensie
go
zatruwa
over it. They can't
ich
reconcile
zdolność
with
do,
that, and
do
this
postrzegania
poisons
rzeczywistości.
their perception of reality.
No, nie chcę się z panem
I
ministrem
don't
tu
want,
spierać
I
o
don't
Persję.
want to
Ja też i w Teheranie byłem.
sort of argue about
widziałem tam
Persia.
bardzo
I've
wielu
visited Tehran
demokratów.
and I've
I ich islam
seen
wcale
many
nie zatruwa.
Democrats there,
Moim
and their
zdaniem
Islam was not
tutaj
poisonous.
mamy do czynienia z pewnym
I
totalitarnym
believe
projektem,
that this is a totalitarian
który
project.
sztucznie wkłada się coś, co jest, jak to
There is an
nazywam,
artificial
techniczne parodią
insertion,
religii, bo to nie
This
jest,
is
to jest
a
parodia
parody.
religii.
a parody of
Ale
religion,
to
really.
widzieliśmy
But we've
nie
already
wiem, w
seen this.
bolszewizmie, w nazizmie.
We could see it
Czy
in
pan widzi
Bolshevism and
bracia
Nazism.
muzułmanów,
Muslim brothers.
proszę bardzo, braci muzułmańskich jako typ
Muslim-
bolszewizmu, czy to jest raczej w sferze Radia
Muslim
Marii?
brothers, would they be Bolsheviks or part of Radio
jeszcze coś trzeciego.
Maria? This is a third or
Ja
fourth
widziałem ich,
value.
ja byłem w Maroku, tam byłem w
visited
kilku ośrodkach
Morocco,
i oni przychodzili na wszystkie
And I went to
dyskusje.
a couple of centers
powiedział,
there, and I had
że to jest
meetings.
mentalność,
They
to
attended
jest
my
bolszewizm
meetings.
pierwszej generacji.
This is Bolshevism
Mianowicie
in
to
first
jest,
generation.
To są bolszewicy
In the first generation. These are Bolsheviks of 1918.
Oni jeszcze nie są
1918,
cyniczni.
1922, they
Oni są
have not become
inteligentni.
cynical yet.
Są
They are still very
idealistyczni.
intelligent, they
Natomiast
are idealistic,
mają taką
and they,
wizję świata,
but their vision
która
of the
im daje
world
pewność,
gives
że oni znają
them
prawdę o świecie.
some
To
sort of
bolszewicy.
security, believing that
oni
they know
wierzyli, że
everything about
marksizm,
the world.
czy rasizm,
Bolsheviks
leninizm
really believe
jakby
that
im
Marxism
daje
and
klucz
Leninism
do
provides them
ostatecznego
with a key
rozumienia świata.
for the
Oni nie byli
final understanding of the
cyniczni
world. They were not
i
cynical.
to nie byli gangsterzy.
They were not gangsters
Otóż,
or mobsters.
w Maroko,
In
czy
Morocco,
w Tunezji to
in
byli
Tunisia,
ludzie, wiele ryzykowali.
those people
Te bractwa
ran
muzułmańskie
high
organizowały
risk.
those Muslim fraternities. They were helping to organize soup kitchens and all sorts of things, help for the poor. But I agree with Minister Sikorski that we have no right, in particular, we have no right to tell anyone that you're not fit to live in democracy.